And with that, we won't stop when we go right into our next panel. So with that, I want to introduce the host for our next panel, who is a long-term supporter of Techsylvania and the Eastern European ecosystem in general. Adrian Picker is a director of product at Bolt for maps, platform, and autonomous driving. And beyond his role in Bolt, he's an avid coach and mentor and teacher about best practices for everything from product development and lean startup methodologies. And among other things, he's been a very, very good friend. And he is the reason, actually, that I moved to Singapore and joined Grab. So he was the person that originally got me moving all across the world from Silicon Valley to Southeast Asia, while he moved back to Europe. So he has been great in like being a key figure in the tech ecosystem for quite a while. And his panel is going to explore the collaboration between startups, corporations, and the public sector. And he'll introduce you his esteemed panelists in a second. So please do all welcome Adi and his great panel. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Philip, for the intro. Wow, that was a great intro for us. And we can jump straight into the topic. So as Philip said, we're going to talk about the collaboration between startups, corporation, and the public sector. So I hope everyone that tuned into the conference is excited to know the point of view of the guests in the panel today. So that we should start by introducing the guest in the panel today. We're having Dragoș Tudorache, member of the European Parliament. We are having Michal Kramarz, who is the head of Google for Startup for Central Europe. And we also have Laszlo Bekessy, who is the co-founder and CEO of CodeBerry School. Welcome, everyone. I would also like to invite you to quickly do a turn of, let's say, introductions, which are expanding a bit onto just the names and the position, just to give a bit of context of the wider area of focus that you guys have within your daily job, and also the kind of angle from which you are looking at this topic of startups, the corporates, and then obviously the public sector. And let's start in the same order, so let's start with Dragoș.
Hi, Adi, and thank you very much to Techsylvania for inviting me to this panel. Very quickly, as you said, I'm a member of European Parliament. I sit in the Renew Group. But probably most relevant info for this particular session is the fact that I chair the AIDA Special Committee, which is the Artificial Intelligence in a Digital Age Special Committee, which is a structure that reflects very well the priority the European Parliament has been giving during this mandate to artificial intelligence in particular, but more broadly to the impact of big tech, of the digital transformation on every walk of life, on our societies, economies, and even on our political systems and democracies. And of course, that has an implication on how the economies run and how the startups, the business sector is being properly supported through the intervention of the public sectors through funding, etc. We're going to have an opportunity to talk all about that later on. I also sit, and that I think is also relevant for our conversation, I also sit in the EU-US delegation of the European Parliament, and I look very much at the strategic implication of the digital sector and also artificial intelligence and the dialogue that we're going to have across the Atlantic on these particular topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Dragoș. Let's switch to Michal now.
Hello, great to be here. I'm Michal. I've been at Google for the last 15 years, so since the beginning of our presence in Central Eastern Europe. I had the pleasure to work with the startups for the last 7 years and observe and support how the ecosystem is developing. And the tremendous growth of startups in our region is, heartwarming, and seeing how the development during the last several years is happening. Is amazing. And Google for Startups' mission is to level the playing field for founders, and actually that's what we're trying to do. and by the programs we organize, by the initiatives we organize, by the organizations we support. We're focusing on really finding the best founders and helping them, but also to support the founders in their early stages of the development. So basically everybody has equal access to technology, everybody has equal access to knowledge, despite where they sit. Yeah, it doesn't have to be Silicon Valley to really be able to build global companies already.
Definitely, that becomes truer and truer by the day as we see more and more European startups getting to like unicorn level. And then when we kind of move our eyes on the map of Europe, we see that Central Europe and Eastern Europe are starting to blossom as well in this area. Let's move on to Laszlo.
Hello, my name is Laszlo. Thank you for having me here. I'm a co-founder and CEO of CodeBerry School. And CodeBerry School is my 29th idea. So I'm pretty used to lean startup development and failing and picking up some new ideas and going from ground zero to develop startups. And besides CodeBerry, which is my full-time job now, I'm doing business coaching, and I'm a board member in the Hungarian organization that represents all companies in the ICT sector towards government, towards other parties. So, I love entrepreneurship and I'm around it.
Great. So let's start with the first topic of the panel. And obviously, when we speak of startups, the obvious elephant in the room, especially in Europe and especially in Central and Eastern Europe, is funding. We keep on talking about it, but there's never enough of it, or if there is, it's not properly structured. So what's your opinion on the status of available funding for startups in the European Union, both from like a public perspective, but also from like a private money, which could come from angel investment, or it could come from venture capital or corporations? And let's start again with Dragos, but we're not going to keep the same order. We're going to mix it up as we go. But let's start with Dragos's opinion on this.
Thank you, Ari. A very good question, and I'm actually very curious to see also what my fellow panelists think about that from their perspective. But from where I sit, I would start by saying that we are finally putting our money where our mouth is. In other words, that we are finally starting to match our political ambition, let's say the political rhetoric around how important digital is, how important the business environment is in the digital sector. We are finally matching that with proper financial support. If we look traditionally or historically at where Europe was in this respect, we were always far behind the US and China. At the same time, while we were proclaiming that we are a global player, or that we want to be a global player that tries to stay in the race, not win the race, but at least stay in the race with the other two big players. And obviously, you cannot do this without proper funding. What has happened, and I think that's important to say, if we look at the developments over the last 2 years with the start of the new mandate of the European Commission, the European Parliament, we've had not only the political rhetoric, but we've had proper money put behind these ambitions. I would start first by saying that if we look at the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which is the post-COVID big financial package that the European Union is putting at the disposal of member states, and through the member states pouring into the economy, there's that 20% which is reserved for the digital investments. And from the discussions that I've recently had with Margareta Vestager and with the President of the European Commission, it seems that all member states are not only hitting their target, but also overpassing the target, and that the kind of investments that they are prepared to make and that they have put in their national programs are the kind of programs that are meant to facilitate, to accelerate the support for the business sector, to support startups, to support also scale-ups, to basically make do with our promise that we are properly propping those that have ideas in Europe and that want to develop, grow, and capitalize on those ideas. There is also a plethora of other instruments which were also traditionally there in the arsenal of EU financial firepower, which have received now much more meaningful amounts and also meaningful mechanisms to make money more easily available to startups, and also try to reduce as much as possible procedures and red tape. I don't think we have managed all the way to simplify that access, but still, I think we are much better off now in this cycle than we were in previous cycles. I would mention a few, maybe Horizon Europe, which is encouraging very much the building up of ecosystems, of networks between companies, between institutes meant to invest in frontier tech. Connecting Europe facility, there's a very interesting facility right now which encourages and networks, in fact, financial institutions at national level which work together with the European Commission to grant loans and even venture capital from amounts between 25,000 all the way to 10 million euros. So this is money that is accessible a bit easier at the national level for startups and scale-ups. There's also the European Innovation Council, which is supporting frontier tech, the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, which also has grants that could be directly accessible for investing in these sectors. And of course, last but not least, the digital innovation hubs, which are supported directly by the European Commission and which are meant to specialize very much the kind of focus that is being put on different technologies, and particularly for this political cycle, let's say, and financial cycle, this specialization is very much encouraged, so that hubs actually start labeling themselves and then therefore zeroing in on various priorities in the digital sector. The idea is to have AI-focused digital hubs. I don't know, any other big and important technology that is out there. So just a few examples. If you'd want me to go a bit deeper into any of this, let me know. Thank you.
Thanks. So Laszlo, how is this part seen from, let's say, the startup founders' perspective, and also you being active in the startup scene in Budapest? How do you see the opportunity, not just for like the public funding availability, but also in general as the opportunity to access funds at various stages of company growth?
I agree with Dragos. My words would be it's getting better because I think I agree that the money is there, and that's really good. So we are not putting, or VCs and governments are putting real money into entrepreneurs, into startups, into accelerator programs. So that's there. But the point where we are coming from is really down compared to the US. And 5 years ago, we were really hearing all just the horror stories, really horror stories, not just like, okay, this company didn't succeed and they failed, but this company was successful and the VC took away from the founders, like horror stories. Now it's not happening that often, so I'm really proud to say that, and it's getting better and better and better. I think where we lack the knowledge compared to the US or China or outside Europe is that governments and big enterprises don't really understand why this startup approach is good for them or good for the economy. So we had to create studies, white papers that really covers how a startup economy can help the whole economy itself, not just the tech economy. So we had to create white papers here in Hungary. I'm sure it will be better. And also just one other thing, that VCs are still not the same quality here in Eastern Europe than in Western Europe and in the US. Just as an example, we received funding from 3 VCs. One of them is an Austrian. The term sheet was 7 pages long, and one of them is a Hungarian, 112 pages long term sheet. So that's a huge difference. Just wasting my time to go through the 112 pages. The money was the same. So that's a different, and I can go on, but I think that's my take.
All right. Yeah, definitely interesting to go deeper into the topic of how good are not just the startups, but also the early stage finance and investors, whether they come from like the venture capital environment or whether they are angel investors. But Michal, you representing one of the largest tech companies that had a lot of focus on helping startups and entrepreneurs grow, but also being very knowledgeable with what happens on the Polish startup scene and the ecosystem. And I have to say, like, if we zoom out on Central and Eastern Europe, Poland is probably one of the best examples of utilizing significant amounts of public money through a quite large number of publicly funded VCs. And there's a lot of big players which are Polish-owned companies that are active in Poland, and a lot of them are spreading their wings across Central and Eastern Europe. So I'm curious to hear your point of view. But as I said, like both from like the Google tech corporation point of view, but also as someone who's knowledgeable in the Polish startup ecosystem.
Yeah, so I start actually from connecting both. So Google's presence in terms of Google for Startups started in 2015 when we opened the campus in Warsaw. So in 2020, during the pandemic, we had actually 5 years anniversary, and we were thinking like what to do in the purely digital world with a physical space of campus, and how to celebrate 5 years without ability to invite people to the physical space. So we actually did a report, like how did the scene change during the five years of our presence. And there are several things changed. All the amount of startups almost doubled in Poland and in Central Eastern Europe. The amount of investment multiplied by 5 times. If you compare end of 2019 and the beginning of 2015, it went up 5 times. And there's also, of course, a big part of this coming up from public money. And I think Dragos was saying about it, and in general, we are aware that there's a big investment in terms of the governments, in terms of supporting the VCs. But there's also a big inflow of money from outside of, I would say, Central Eastern Europe. So recently, we are working on a report. How did the VC ecosystem change in 2021? And what we're seeing already from the report is that around 30% of the investment that happened in 2021 were already with investment from the funds that were from outside of our region, which means that the money are starting to more and more flow into the market. From the point of view of Google itself, like our focus is also on supporting the connection between the government and startups. So during the pandemic, but also now, we are organizing a lot of roundtables where basically we can 3-way understand each other. Like from one point of view, Google is a big organization, but has a mindset of a startup for many years, and we still believe that we have some of the startup DNA remaining. From the other point of view, we work a lot with the startups. Like Laszlo is a great example of our alumni from GFS Accelerator. So we're super happy to have Laszlo here. But we also work with governments to kind of try to find this ideal balance for the ecosystem to grow and develop. So I think there's a lot of still to do, and there's a lot of in terms of common understanding on every side what are the challenges. And I think the learning process is fast and probably has to be even faster.
So let's kind of zoom in on a specific stage of the company growth, because we've been talking about like funding at several stages of the company, and I would like to for a moment to zoom in a bit on the early stage and the starting a company where most of the, let's say, financing comes either from accelerators or from some angel investors. And when we talk about accelerators, there's always this important difference that a lot of the founders should keep into account between like private accelerators, who usually have some sort of like VC money, private money, or a group of angel investors behind, corporate accelerator, which is usually some sort of an internal innovation program by which corporations are trying to choose startups with whom they have significant overlap in the scope or the theme of what they are trying to solve. And there's also the publicly funded accelerators who are encouraging innovation on one side, but on the other side, company creation and creating more opportunities for talented workers. So if we look at these like three types of accelerators that provide both the funding, but also the early stage education and access to mentorship, I'm curious, how do you see this kind of opportunity growing, expanding, or what's the status of it in Central and Eastern Europe, at least in the countries that, or in the areas that you have the right knowledge about it? And let's start with Laszlo.
I think this will be my personal opinion. And I think these accelerators are very, 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 very good. We also started in an accelerator back then in 2016. And after that, we participated in 4, including the last one was this Google Accelerator. And in every stage, it really made sense. But I think accelerators shouldn't do anything with equity or money. They are not for there. My personal opinion is that they are good in terms of mentoring, and especially in the early stage, it is really important not to take money because you don't know what are you doing. You don't have the customers, you don't have the means, you don't have the enthusiasm about the problem because you don't understand the problem. That's what every entrepreneur is fighting in the early stages. So I think it's really, really valuable to have someone smart who did this before around you, who is not interested in your company valuation and don't want to give you money. If there's a prize at the accelerator, that's good. I consider that as a marketing stunt to get people into the accelerators. I think you will find the good accelerators by on the web page stating we don't take equity. Those are the good ones.
Right. And then so probably so what you're saying is Ideal and Accelerator's main value proposition should be around helping founders get to problem solution fit, or ideally towards product to market fit, and probably providing the future connections for the next round of investment.
Definitely. And, every accelerator can help in different stages. So, for example, what we participated in 2016 was helping us to discover the problem itself. Last year in Google Accelerator, we were talking about segmentation. So we had users and we couldn't segment them. And that was really the valuable advice to do that. And this is how it transformed the business. It's a different stage, different problem.
I'm taking Laszlo's feedback that we should add on the webpage that we don't take equity. So one of the elements of Google for Startups accelerators is that we don't take equity. So the approach is basically because of the fact that Google was a startup a couple of years ago, we kind of treat it as supporting the founders in terms of going big, going international, because basically we believe that if startups succeed, so does Google, and so does everybody else in terms of the economy and global. And I think that in terms of how the accelerators operate, we put a lot of attention exactly to mentoring. So what Laszlo was saying, we basically try to build up accelerators in a way that probably joint content for the whole cohort of startups is around 30-40%. The rest is actually composed out of mentorship, and this is the way that on the application process we get the application forms, but then we do the interviews with the startup before inviting for the accelerator, and actually do a second need of assessment in terms of what is needed, and then connect specific mentors in terms of the specific startup's needs. So, for example, now on the 5th of October, we'll be announcing a cohort of accelerator on health and well-being. And basically there's going to be 15 startups. I cannot, unfortunately, yet spoil the surprise and give the names, but there are startups from across Europe and a big representation of Central Eastern Europe there. But the thing is, we have their mentors from Fitbit, we have their mentors from Google Health, we have mentors from basically most of the companies that even AstraZeneca and other big corporate companies, because we try to connect the best of what we have from the point of view of technology and our knowledge with the industry knowledge for the vertical accelerators we're doing and the startups. And I think this is the biggest benefit, because then everybody benefits. Mentors learn from startups on the new solutions, on the new things, and startups gain the knowledge from professionals that probably getting there by themselves or buying this knowledge will be super expensive. And of course, it has to be equity free, because then it actually gives the startup the potential to, after the acceleration, go to investors and, don't sell the half of the company at the very beginning, but actually gain money for growth and for development.
Thanks, Michal. So, Dragos, what's your opinion from your, let's say, public side involvement, or how's the point of view from the public sector that's trying to figure out this corporate or early stage help that startups might need?
Well, I think accelerators are an absolutely essential part of building the right digital ecosystems. It's clear, and I think it's where the state and the public sector can blend their efforts in the most efficient way. I've always said that next to a bright guy or a bright girl with a bright idea, you need to put as quickly as possible the right amount of money, the right amount of training and expertise on things that probably that bright guy or that bright girl don't know yet. But also access to infrastructure that probably they can't afford at the beginning, and which they need to grow their idea into a successful business plan and a successful business. So the best place where you can actually bring all of these together, and where the state, the public authorities can also invest their contribution, is in these sort of hubs, accelerators type of structures. There are, let's say, if I am to categorize them, at least from those that have grown in the European Union over the last decade, we have the big national ones where scale and density is the key word. There are few examples, very good examples in Europe. We recently were in Paris with our colleagues in the Renew Group, and we had a visit at Station F in Paris, which I think is a well-known accelerator, where, again, the state and the private sector mix their contributions to the benefit of startups. But there are examples like this in many other member states. You then have local ones, regional or local ones, where the advantage is that you bring local authorities with maybe priorities that they have at the local level, and where, let's say, startups at the local level, maybe with solutions that are very much applicable there, can interact with the public authorities and benefit from the kind of support that they put in there. And then I mentioned also at the beginning, we have this network of digital innovation hubs, which are very important also for what I was saying in terms of specialization. It is where the state can also invest funds, whether national or European, and create the necessary infrastructure that young engineers need to test their ideas in a safe environment, and in an environment that is complex enough and strong enough to help them grow those ideas into businesses, but also, again, train, get expertise, connect with other fellow engineers, and connect with those that can be mentors for them, connect with financiers, so on and so forth. So again, I think at the European level, we have a vital interest to continue supporting these sort of ecosystems, to keep investing and putting the right money, not only this sort of structured money, but also to bring in venture capital, money that is more prone to risk, which is something that has lacked in the European Union for quite some time, when compared particularly to the Silicon Valley and the US in general. And I think that's the kind of focus that we need to have, both at member state level, national level, but also at European level.
So we focus so far on like the earlier stages of a company growth, that, as Dragos was saying, like we have a smart and energetic founder, and then we need to make sure that we pair them with some funding to get them started. We need to pair them with some mentors to get them learning. But then once things start to grow, we also need to put something else next to them. We need to put next to them talented engineers, talented product managers, talented designers that actually do digital design and user experience, and specialize in flows that need to happen in web or mobile apps. And this is like more towards like Laszlo's turf, let's say, when it comes to the educational part. But I would like to dive a bit deeper into this area, because if in Europe, and especially in Central and Eastern Europe, we plan to grow in the digital sector, we already know that there's a lot of problems in hiring to the level that there's a demand on behalf of the companies. And we were hearing in the previous talk that in some cases it's harder and more expensive to hire an engineer in Eastern Europe than it is to hire in France. Okay, for a variety of reasons. But we know that recruiting is a challenge, and we're talking about engineers, but we can also talk about product managers, for which there's no formal education and everyone kind of like learns on the job and does separate trainings, and the same with designers and so on. So I'm curious, how do you guys see this kind of like aspect of the educational part? Because this is not something that we can fix in a quarter. This is an area where we need a longer term vision and a plan. And let's start with Michal, and then we're going to go to Laszlo.
Yeah, so I think from the point of view of technical education, like our region is extremely strong in terms of STEAM, so science, technology, engineering, learning. And basically what I think we are still missing is exactly this project management / business side of growing the companies, but it comes from experience. It a lot comes from the age of the ecosystem we have and from the amount of the companies that people were able to go through. So this is one element, but the other element is exactly comes from education. While it's relatively common in our region to learn programming, to learn mathematics, to learn everything that can help you build the product, the project management and the marketing and these elements are not so much developed. And I think this should be a big focus if we really want to build a product that compete globally. Apart from tech talent and apart from financing, there also have to be people that from the beginning of their education learn how to go with the product to the market, how to build up projects, how to build the structures of organization. So business and organization element of education is super important. And why we look at, United States or even Great Britain, there's a huge amount of schools educating in this field and with a long history. In our region especially, I think this should be also a focus of the education, to give people more knowledge, which is actually up to date, which is marketable, and which is business focused. So connecting the both sides of the business and the technology is key in being competitive in nowadays market. I'll give you a very simple example. We have a lot of, before the pandemic especially, we had a lot of investors coming, for example, from Israel, visiting us and talking about potential interesting startups for the investment, etc. And the main theme that was coming up was basically that here is a huge amount of good product and tech talent, but the entrepreneurial side and the scalability of the site can be joined from the for example, from Israel. And then there is a close collaboration in terms of how to actually build a very successful startups. We tend to have a lot of interesting startups in our region, but at the same time, many of the founders think very much locally, think about their market, think about the closest markets. I don't remember how many times I spoke with the founders saying, okay, we want to go international. And I was asking, a startup in Poland, what does this mean going international? Going to Germany, for example. Whereas going international for, US startups mean going global. Going international for Israeli startups actually doesn't mean so much going to US, because originally products are already built with the US market in their focus. So this is kind of not even the educational change only, but this is kind of this mindset change that we need to think that, especially nowadays, if we can hire people from all across the world, we can also go with our product all across the world. And thinking of going international means going global rather than going to the nearest neighbor country. So I think this is also worth to keep in mind.
I agree. It's my mindset thing for me as well. If you ever saw Americans or British people pitch something, even if the team is not that good as a Central European, even if the idea, even if the execution is way worse, you will fall in love. So they have this entitlement, or they discourage compared, especially for Hungary. And I cannot say that Romanian pitches are that as well. But in Hungary, we just let's do something first and then sell something later. It's an engineering approach, but I will agree with Michal that we need some salesmanship, some entrepreneurship, some project management layer, and we lack that. So people don't believe actually that they can do stuff here. They will be employees, not entrepreneurs. So that's a mindset thing I think we need to change. And regarding tech talent, I agree that we have the tech talent here, but unfortunately salaries on the West are way better. And especially with tech, it's remote. So it's really, really hard to hire somebody because I'm racing with big enterprise salaries, like I don't want to name them, but London office. I cannot give that much of a salary to a tech talent or a project manager or sales talent. So it's really, really difficult. And also I agree with this going international thing. It's really tough. Hungary is a 10 million country. So if you start a business here, you shouldn't think about Hungary at all. But it's really, really tough not to think about my home country. But yeah, if I develop something that should be used all across Europe, if I'm not planning to move to the US first, because I know Europe better, but that's really difficult because language problems, currency problems, business unit problems. So it's really, really tough. So I think these are manageable, but it's tougher than in the US, I guess.
Dragos, what can we do from the public side to contribute to improving the educational support, not just for entrepreneurs, but also for engineering and other type of jobs that we need in companies that start to scale up and grow bigger and bigger?
Well, I think we need a fundamental paradigm shift here, because if there is anything that we need, and that startups right now in Europe need more than money, and here I fully agree with both Michal and Laszlo, if there is something that they need more than money, is talent and human resources. And that's valid across the board. There's not a single business that I've talked to in Europe that doesn't put this forward. What can the states do? What can the public sector do? Change, again, the whole take on the educational systems for the future. It's not going to be easy because this is not a domain where the EU can intervene. This is a very national competence still. But I think the EU needs to come with a more integrated vision and somewhat find a way, institutionally, legally, politically, to then trickle down that vision at the national level, so that we all push in the same direction with the same tools forward. Beyond, I'm not going to dwell. I fully agree with Michal and Laszlo on the need to actually focus on entrepreneurial skills as early as we can in our curricula, in our education systems, because otherwise we're not going to put that edge that Laszlo says you can find in maybe British or US young engineers. So we certainly need to insert that in our curriculums, which right now you barely find. The second thing which I would mention is actual digital skills talent, which I don't think is enough. We somehow say that, well, there's a lot of talent in Europe, and you come to Europe and you find good engineers, and good talent, but it's not enough. Again, in recent conversations that I've had with the Commission, if we look at the ambition and the amount of money that is going to go into this sector and how we project the growth of the sector, by 2030 we're going to need somewhere around 20 million experts, specialists. Right now, the current growth status quo will take us to 12 million. So there is a fundamentally big gap that we need to fill in, and we can only fill it in if we actually focus our education systems on actually producing even more kids, students with the right amount of skill sets to actually go into the sector. And one last thing, if I may, for 30 seconds, there is another aspect which is absolutely crucial, which is that we also need to adapt our education systems for the end user. We are now building and transforming again our societies, economies, and our lives, turning them digital. But for the end user, for the regular John Doe in the street, they can't take part in what the businesses are going to put forward in terms of services and products if they don't have themselves the bare skills to actually access and use those applications. So we also need to invest in basic digital education for the general population. Otherwise, again, it's difficult to reach that moment when you have the right uptake. So that's the kind of approach that I think we need to take at the public sector and really push it at European level. Thank you.
And I would add one more thing to this side. Like, sure, like we have all those parties together, but the other thing that we also need is to give the opportunity for each of those players in the market to meet, collaborate, get to know each other, and exchange feedback. And I would like to highlight the role of events such as Tech Sylvania and other bigger or smaller tech-related or entrepreneurial-related events. And one thing that I learned by organizing several Startup Weekend events, for example, in Central and Eastern Europe, and I know that Oana and Vlad from Tech Sylvania and Philip was extremely involved in organizing these type of events and kind of like raising the awareness and getting more people into that community of entrepreneurs. And then on this side, we should also encourage both the public sector, but also the corporate sector to help out and understand there's like a lot of folks in local startup communities that are organizing events that we should support, both with financial means if possible, but also with support from in terms of going there and speaking and helping, reaching out to young entrepreneurs that participate to those events to offer advice. And I see this as some sort of like innovation contamination type of events where with like 1 or 2 days of discussions, you can actually bring a lot of information and relevant connection to larger numbers of people. And hopefully next year we'll be able to have a Tech Sylvania conference in person again. That being said, our time is almost up. Thank you, Dragos. Thank you, Michal. Thank you, Laszlo, for the time that you spent today with us. And I hope the insights that you shared were interesting and useful to the participants. Now, back to Philip.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you very much, esteemed panelists. It was wonderful to have you here at Tech Sylvania, sharing your learnings about this collaboration. Thank you so much.